Imagine driving home after a quiet evening with your family. The road is calm, the night feels ordinary, and everything seems routine, until suddenly red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror. In that moment, your mind starts racing. Maybe you were driving slightly faster than you should have. Maybe you missed a sign, but you're confident you didn't do anything seriously wrong. Still, the flashing lights mean one thing: you're being pulled over. You carefully guide your car to the side of the road, trying to stay calm. Like most people, you want to do the right thing. You consider yourself a responsible citizen. You follow the law, and if you happen to legally carry something like a firearm, you believe honesty and transparency are the safest choices. It seems logical that cooperating fully will make the situation smoother and quicker. The officer approaches your vehicle, and after the usual greetings, the conversation begins. Then comes a question that sounds simple, but carries far more weight than most drivers realize: whether there are any weapons in the vehicle. At first glance, the question seems routine. It might even feel like basic safety protocol. But the way you respond to that single question can dramatically change how the entire interaction unfolds. Many drivers answer without thinking, assuming that being straightforward will prevent complications. However, in many cases, that answer can unintentionally open the door to a series of events that place you under greater scrutiny. Once certain information enters the conversation, the dynamics of the traffic stop often shift. Officers are trained to prioritize safety above all else, and when the possibility of a weapon enters the picture, their perception of risk may increase instantly. This doesn't necessarily mean the driver has done anything wrong, but it does mean the situation becomes more cautious, more controlled, and more investigative. What many drivers don't realize is that traffic stops come with certain legal obligations. Across most jurisdictions, when an officer lawfully stops a vehicle, the driver is required to provide identification, typically a driver's license, and often registration and proof of insurance when requested. These requirements are standard, and refusing to comply can quickly escalate a simple stop into a far more serious legal situation. There is sometimes confusion about the concept of the right to travel, with some people believing it means they can drive without a license or refuse identification during a stop. In reality, the legal interpretation of travel rights is very different. It relates primarily to the ability to move freely between states or across borders without discrimination. It does not eliminate the requirement to follow driving laws or present identification when operating a vehicle on public roads. Misunderstanding this concept can turn a minor interaction into something much more complicated. Instead of resolving a routine traffic stop in a few minutes, it can lead to accusations such as refusal to identify or obstruction, which can result in citations or even arrest. A far better approach during a traffic stop is simple: comply physically with lawful instructions, but avoid volunteering unnecessary information. The roadside is not the place where legal arguments are won. Instead, it's the place where people should focus on keeping the situation calm, controlled, and uneventful. Basic safety practices go a long way in setting the tone for a smooth interaction. Pull over safely as soon as possible. If the stop occurs at night, turning on the interior dome light can help the officer see clearly inside the vehicle. Keep your hands visible on the steering wheel and avoid sudden movements. If the officer asks you to retrieve documents from somewhere in the car, calmly explain what you're doing before reaching for anything. Small actions like these reduce tension and make it clear that you are cooperative and aware of safety concerns. But the most complicated part of the encounter often comes when certain questions begin. When an officer asks about weapons, the correct response may depend heavily on the laws of the state you are in. Across the country, firearm disclosure rules differ significantly. In some states, drivers who are legally carrying a firearm have a duty to inform the officer immediately during a stop. In others, disclosure is only required if the officer directly asks about it. And in some jurisdictions, there is no legal obligation to disclose the presence of a firearm at all. Understanding which category applies in the state you are traveling through is extremely important. Knowing the law beforehand can prevent unnecessary confusion or mistakes during a high-pressure moment on the roadside. Even in places where disclosure is not required, many drivers still choose to volunteer the information. They believe honesty will reassure the officer. However, once the presence of a firearm becomes known, the officer's approach to the situation may change significantly. This reaction isn't necessarily personal. It is largely the result of training and psychology. Officers are trained to consider potential risks quickly. When an unknown individual and a weapon are involved in the same situation, caution naturally increases. As a result, the officer may take additional steps to maintain control of the scene. These steps might include asking the driver to step out of the vehicle, asking where the firearm is located, or temporarily securing the weapon during the stop. From the officer's perspective, these actions are about maintaining safety. From the driver's perspective, however, the interaction can suddenly feel much more serious than expected. Another factor that complicates these situations is the way conversations during traffic stops can evolve. Officers often ask questions that appear casual or conversational, but these questions may serve investigative purposes. Answers can help officers build a clearer picture of what is happening, or sometimes create reasons to look deeper. For example, questions about where someone is coming from or where they are headed might seem harmless. However, they can lock a driver into a narrative that may later be scrutinized for inconsistencies. Even small differences in wording can sometimes raise suspicion, even if the driver simply misspoke or forgot a detail. Other questions may be designed to gauge reactions or gather information that could justify further action. When drivers feel pressured to explain themselves in detail, they sometimes provide far more information than necessary. The reality is that most people feel a strong desire to prove they are honest and cooperative. When an authority figure asks questions, the natural instinct is to answer and demonstrate that nothing is wrong. Unfortunately, that instinct can sometimes work against the driver. Conversations at the roadside are rarely neutral. Every answer becomes part of the overall picture that the officer is forming. Nervousness, hesitation, or conflicting details can be interpreted in different ways. Humor is another thing some drivers attempt in order to ease tension. While jokes might seem like a good way to lighten the mood, roadside interactions are not always the best setting for humor. Misunderstandings can occur easily, and what one person sees as harmless sarcasm might be interpreted differently by someone who is already operating in a high-alert environment. Another common turning point during traffic stops involves consent. If an officer does not have probable cause to search a vehicle, there are still two main ways a search can occur. One is if the driver gives permission. The other is if circumstances create reasonable suspicion that justifies extending the stop. Many drivers end up granting consent without fully realizing it. Social pressure plays a major role. Questions like, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, do you?" can make drivers feel obligated to say yes in order to appear cooperative. But once consent is given, the legal landscape changes immediately. A voluntary search removes many of the protections that might otherwise apply. Drivers should remember that they are not required to prove innocence by agreeing to searches. Simply remaining calm and clearly stating that they do not consent to a search is often the most straightforward response. Consistency matters during these interactions. Staying polite, calm, and brief helps prevent escalation. Long explanations or emotional reactions can sometimes complicate the situation further. Another tactic sometimes mentioned during traffic stops is the possibility of bringing a police dog to the scene. While there are legal limitations regarding how long a traffic stop can be extended to wait for a canine unit, drivers may feel pressured when the idea is introduced. Some people agree to searches simply to avoid the delay or perceived embarrassment of a dog inspection. Again, maintaining a calm and consistent response is key. Repeating a clear statement that you do not consent to searches keeps the interaction simple and avoids misunderstandings. Occasionally, some interactions may involve tension or frustration. In certain situations, officers may test a driver's reactions or push conversational boundaries. The best response in these moments is composure. Becoming argumentative or emotional rarely improves the situation and may actually create additional complications. Remaining respectful, calm, and focused on short, clear answers keeps the encounter from escalating unnecessarily. For drivers who are legally carrying firearms, another important rule is to avoid handling the weapon during a traffic stop. Even if the intention is simply to show where it is or comply with instructions, reaching for a firearm in the presence of an officer can create an extremely dangerous misunderstanding. If an officer decides to secure the firearm temporarily, it is generally safer to inform them of its location and allow them to retrieve it themselves. Keeping your hands visible and avoiding sudden movements helps ensure that the situation remains safe for everyone involved. Ultimately, the most important principle to remember during any traffic stop is that the roadside is not the place to resolve legal disputes. Courtrooms and legal processes exist for that purpose. The immediate goal during a stop should be to remain calm, comply with lawful requests, and avoid unnecessary escalation. Knowing your rights and responsibilities before such a situation occurs can make a tremendous difference. When drivers understand the laws of the state they are in, they are far less likely to panic or make mistakes under pressure. Preparation also includes something many people overlook: knowing who to contact if legal assistance ever becomes necessary. Having access to reliable legal advice before a problem arises can save valuable time and stress if a situation ever develops. Traffic stops are among the most common interactions between citizens and law enforcement. In most cases, they are brief and uneventful, but understanding how these encounters work and how certain responses can influence the direction of the conversation can help drivers navigate them with confidence and clarity. The key ideas are simple: stay calm, follow lawful instructions, avoid volunteering unnecessary information, and be clear about your rights when appropriate. Politeness and composure go a long way toward keeping the interaction professional and controlled. Every driver hopes never to find themselves in a complicated roadside situation. But if the moment ever comes when flashing lights appear in the rearview mirror, knowing how to handle the encounter calmly and intelligently can make all the difference. Understanding the balance between cooperation and personal rights is one of the most valuable pieces of knowledge any driver can have. When handled correctly, even a stressful traffic stop can remain exactly what it should be: a brief interruption on the road rather than a life-changing event. And if you found this information helpful and want more practical insights about understanding your rights, staying informed, and handling real-life situations with confidence, make sure to stay connected for more content like this. Knowledge is one of the most powerful tools anyone can have, especially when it comes to protecting yourself, making smart decisions, and staying calm in moments that matter the most.